G'day and welcome to this full vehicle tour of this Volkswagen Passat TDI B5.5 model, B5.5 being the facelift version of the B5 Passat. This version of the Volkswagen Passat shares its platform with the B5 model Audi A4. Even by modern standards, it's still quite a handsome looking vehicle with clean, simple lines and these 17-inch alloys that complement the car's styling nicely. This is the facelifted version, which received these tail lights with this round treatment and similarly with the front lights. No visible exhaust tip on the rear of the vehicle. This is a rather well-worn example of the vehicle, which has had rather a considerable sum spent on repairs chasing various electrical, transmission and exhaust gas recirculation problems, although the TDI engines themselves are virtually indestructible. Stepping inside the vehicle, this one has the grey leather interior. It was also available with black and beige leather. We find a 4-spoke Volkswagen polyurethane steering wheel in this model, a conventional automatic transmission, with wood grain trim. This is a well-worn example, and the dashboard, apparently made of recycled plastic, has cracked and rather disintegrated. We find a soft touch upper dash, but the rest of the cabin is all hard plastic. The window controls are located in the conventional position on the driver's side. However, all the other windows are located up here by the door handle. Another electrical problem with this vehicle is that the rear passenger side door doesn't open from the outside. So let's start the vehicle up. This vehicle uses a conventional key, a flip key, which would have been quite advanced for its time in styling. Foot on the brake and insert the key. Oops. And we hear the rather tractor-like sounding engine start up. The external temperature sensor is also broken on this vehicle. It's definitely not 45 degrees today. We'll give it a few revs since the vehicle is warmed up. The engine really does not sound the best at all. It's quite tractor-like, but it does provide really consistent performance. And the gearbox itself is very impressive, the way it downshifts quite quickly when acceleration is requested, for the most part. This car has a relatively loud factory exhaust tone. I'm not entirely sure whether there's a blow in the exhaust somewhere or it's just been tuned that way to fit with the sportier characteristic of the car. We have our conventional dials here with Volkswagen style 10x100 instead of the usual 1x1000, and actual increments of temperature on the temperature gauge. This vehicle has the Volkswagen Climatronic climate control system, an aftermarket stereo, electronic stability program, which is quite advanced for a vehicle of its age. The vents themselves are a little unusual if you're used to Japanese vehicles. There's no dial to close and open the vents, but rather you turn them up and down by moving this actual wheel. We have conventional indicator and wiper stalks. Another touch which is a little unusual if you're used to Japanese vehicles is that the door hinge mechanism is exposed, so you can actually see the mechanical workings of the door hinge rather than it being hidden inside the door frame. So that's a nice touch. Down here on the door panel we have our boot release and fuel cap release. Another thing to note is that there's no indication on the fuel gauge as to which side the filler is on. However, it is on the driver's side on this vehicle. Stepping into the rear of the vehicle, we find quite a cavernous rear seat. trimmed in grey leather similar to the front, with quite generous foot space. There are no rear air vents, however. Stepping inside, there's tight but comfortable headroom. We have two vanity lights on either side rather than a central light, typical of most other vehicles. We also have plenty of foot space underneath the seats, so it's quite a good, comfortable car for long distance cruising. Having pulled the bonnet's release, this little tab pops out conveniently, and we simply pull it and lift to open the bonnet. So we lift it up and it comes out another notch, and then we can pull it and lift the bonnet to open the hood, or bonnet. But having opened the hood, we are disappointed to find that the Germans have decided in their wisdom to cover up absolutely everything with plastic panels. We have here red lettering on the TDI, which I believe means it's the larger capacity 2-litre model. A coloured blue and white Volkswagen badge, which is quite pretty, unlike the plain version on the outside of the car. So let's go through and have a look at the specifics of this engine bay. Timing belt sticker here, indicating that it was changed recently in the 24th week of 2017. This side of the engine we have our turbocharger that you can see that you can see here. And interestingly, on this right next to it we have the air box, and there seems to be a with our air intake from up in here and then through into here, and with our air box underneath this cover here. But interestingly, there is this perforated heat shield to try to protect the intake air and the airbox from the heat from the turbocharger. So that's an interesting design. Looking inside the wheel arch, we can see our upper A-arm for our double wishbone front suspension. Looking closely, you can see there are actually two upper ball joints on the A-arm, so it's actually a split two-piece A-arm. And we have what seems to be a link to the steering rack, although the location way back and out behind the wheel hub is a bit unusual, or very unusual. Underneath the vehicle we can see our front anti-roll bar, our double wishbone style front suspension. Looking underneath the rear of the vehicle, we see a hidden double exhaust tip, and surprisingly for a vehicle of its price point, which was considerably more expensive than a Toyota Camry of its time, we find a torsion beam style rear suspension, which is this girder in the middle there that you can see, which is hung off the rear of the body, and then has the shock and the strut attached to it with a separate spring compared to so it's not a coilover, it's a separate spring, a compact spring, and then a longer shock. So by doing it this way, we can achieve a larger boot by mounting the shock along the side, where it can have a long travel, but then the spring doesn't need to have such a large range of travel. Here's another look at the torsion beam rear suspension. So we have our bushing here, and that's essentially where the torsion beam, which is this girder that runs back to the wheel and then across the car to the other side and then to the other wheel. More space efficient method of constructing the rear suspension compared to a multi-link style design. Underneath the middle of the vehicle we find an additional resonator, and quite a lot of effort and quite a lot of attention to detail to achieve a flat underbody, with a lot of effort towards aerodynamic treatments and flat panels to smooth the underbody airflow of the vehicle.